The late 1990s undoubtedly stands out as an important time in the games industry. These were in many ways the seminal years, and helped guide gaming in the direction as we know it today. A large number of well-known and beloved franchises were established in this time frame, setting the basis for things to come. It was also a time when developers tried out new things, laying the brickwork on what came before to set the way for a whole new genres to be formed. Funny enough, there was a time in the 90s where first-person shooters were simply called Doom clones, which lasted up until the FPS genre got going and gained its everlasting popularity. Making clone games has been an ongoing trend over the years, and it's funny how it still happens to this day. That being said, following in the footsteps of a giant is never an easy task. So let's get things on track and get to a very particular game that we need to talk about. In the mid-90s, the gaming landscape saw Diablo hit the market, and so started a whole string of clones in its likeness. Just days after Christmas of 1996, this ARPG giant launched. It flew off shelves as fast as gamers could get their hands on it, becoming one of the most talked about games of the time. The gripping combat and gory action took PCs by storm, and developers over the years have been eager to get in on that frantic action-packed gameplay. There's been many games that try to capture the Diablo magic, with some being way more successful than others. This leads us into Nox. Released February 2000, only a few months before Diablo 2 was unleashed upon the public. At a glance, you could quite easily lump this innovative title into the category of just being another Diablo clone. To be honest, I counted myself among these folk, as I only got the game to hold me over while I waited for my next big adventure into Sanctuary. Nox looked to be a decent enough candidate, but was I ever in for a pleasant surprise? Going so far as to label it a Diablo clone is a bit unfair. You'd be doing a solid title a major disservice by thinking it was hoping to be just another new ARPG, trying to cash in on that Diablo craze. Looking back at its development, there is a lot that went into making Nox, and proves to be very much an interesting and standout title that holds its own in many ways. The initial concept of what would become Nox was quite ambitious. The game was envisioned to be an updated version of the classic 1985 arcade game Gauntlet. This old school game's frantic top-down gameplay was as good a basis as any as a starting point for a game. On top of that, the idea was to mix in the odd combination of Mortal Kombat as well as the Magic the Gathering trading card game. Now, this should be enough to raise quite a few eyebrows, but trust me, it'll make more sense in a minute. Early design on the game came to life in developer Michael Booth's spare bedroom. Under the name Hyperion Technologies, they made some pretty advanced driving simulators of all things, along with Nox as a side project of course. This process continued until Westwood, and yes, I mean the legends of the real-time strategy genre, Westwood Studios, acquired Nox and brought the team under its wing. Circling back around to that initial concept of the game, Nox was leaning towards a multiplayer spellcaster slugfest, closer in feel to an FPS arena shooter, except from an isometric perspective. Your mage would duke it out with others, almost like a Magic the Gathering card show with the spells available in your hotbar acting in a way like the cards in a player's hand. You would then cast spells by stringing in a pattern on the gamepad to pull off spells and combos, quite a bit like a fighting game. This was quite the ambitious concept, to say the least, as there was nothing close to this on the market. Funny enough though, just over a decade since Nox was released, another very innovative indie title popped onto the scene. In many ways, what the game Magicka achieved with its spellcasting systems reminded me of that early vision that Nox was going for. Whether or not this was the inspiration behind Arrowhead Game Studios' excellent creation, what they pulled off with Magicka was absolutely commendable. Sadly, this interesting gameplay mechanic never made it into the released version of Nox as we know the game today. The developers decided that the barrier to entry was reaching a bit too high for their liking. It benefited the more dexterous players way too much, meanwhile players new to the game experienced too much of a steep learning curve. The systems were modified and brought more in tune to what we ended up seeing in the final product. 2 more classes were added in to provide some extra variety to the game and bring it closer to an RPG experience. The Conjurer acted as the summoning and range weapon specialist while employing his own selection of spells. The Warrior slotted in as the perfect beginner class with a smaller range of skills and no mana to stress over. Each class proved to be quite unique in their own playstyles and made for some great additions to the game. As time passed, the game moved even further from that first design vision. Nox became less of a competitive wizard dealer and fell more in line with an RPG. In a strange way, the spell combo system did end up making its way into the final product. Whenever you cast a spell, your character will word certain arcane phrases while a sequence of hand gestures appeared above his head. This is an interesting holdover from that old system, and in a way gave a fun nod to how you would have needed to manually button in a pattern to pull off your desired spells. Moving away from a more hardcore competitive game opened the door for a stronger single player approach, which wasn't a bad move at all. You fill the shoes of the unlikely hero, an average Joe, or Jack in this case, who gets ripped from our world as he's teleported to the magical land of Nox. This story might seem a little bit cliched, especially by today's standards, but Nox cleverly plays it all tongue-in-cheek. The world is very whimsical and fun, so the good old fish out of water tale makes for a welcome one here. What adds a heaping dose of flavor to the tale is how the three classes gets woven into the world. Each class starts off in their own starting area. From the conjurer's quaint little village to the mystical castle of the wizard, the locations are as well crafted as they are varied. From the get-go through to the end, you'll explore a straightforward quest line that guides you through the story beats. This will weave together a bunch of the areas that are also visited by the other classes, so it's here where things take on an interesting turn. You see, the wizards and warriors of Nox don't quite see eye to eye all that much. So when you visit the magical Galava castle as the warrior, you'll be facing off against a horde of spell-slinging mages. On the other side of things, the wizard will need to infiltrate the warrior's fortress of Dunmere through its underground tunnels. While it's not completely different locations and storylines, the way new bits and pieces open up in familiar areas makes for a great returning experience. Not to mention, each class has their own unique endings, so multiple playthroughs comes highly recommended. This would be a chore if the game wasn't such an absolute blast to play. The warrior has only a small set of abilities, but using these together to pull off some fun killing moves makes him a bit more than just the vanilla choice. Then there's the conjurer, who can summon and charm his way to success, all the while you'll be firing off arrows with a range of elemental effects. Not to mention the fun collection of spells that you'll be using to add an extra layer of spice that makes this class a real fun one to play. I must admit, he's my personal favorite of the trio. Finally, the wizard is obviously the standout of the three. During your playtime, you'll be raking in a good collection of spells, about twice as many as the conjurer has at his disposal. What makes the class such a standout is the absolute mountain of creativity the game places into the player's hands. With so many tools, the options felt plentiful, and made way for all manner of playstyles. Whether you'd like to stick with your tried and true gameplay style, or mix and match to see what deals best in different situations, the wizard allowed you to play in a variety of ways. Another fun layer on top of the already stacked offerings Nox gives us lies in its TrueSight system. Since I first played the game way back, this mechanic managed to stick in my mind, and I've often wondered why it's not being used in games more often. As the player takes on an overhead view of the world, your vision will actually be limited, in a sense closer to what Jack sees in his surroundings. This opens up some neat little tricks to play around with. For example, luring monsters to a door to whack them as they pop through, or sniping unsuspecting enemies through a window. I love the many little offerings Nox cooked up that made the game unique and such a memorable game. This sight system just proved to be another standout part of an overall exceptional package. The saddest part of the tale has to be the bleak future that awaited Nox fans. Players saw only a handful of patches, as well as the free edition of Nox Quest. This added a collection of multiplayer scenarios for up to 6 players, finally letting us team up to take on increasingly difficult challenges. Even so, there still wasn't any co-op options for the main campaign, which would have been a great addition in the sequel. However, with Westwood belonging to EA though, it most probably means the Nox IP has a very slim chance of ever being revisited. Nox is truly a gem from days gone, but it's not destined to be forgotten. I rediscovered Nox on GOG a while back, an instant purchase for me as my fond memories of the game compelled me to give it another playthrough. To my absolute delight, it's one of those titles that more than holds up in this current age of gaming. It's a game that lived in the shadow of another franchise, but ended up being a title that deserves to still be picked up by RPG fans old and new. These are just my thoughts on Nox. Do you feel the same way or have something extra to add? Let me know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more indie and classic gaming content, feel free to subscribe and take a stab at the like button if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for stopping by everyone, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.